When we talk about the origins of civilization, our minds often drift toward Egypt with its massive pyramids, or perhaps the Indus Valley with its mysterious cities. Yet, long before those empires left their marks on history, there was another culture, hidden for millennia beneath the sands of Mesopotamia. These were the Sumerians, the people who transformed human existence forever. Imagine a world around 4000 to 3000 BCE. Humanity had already learned to farm, but most people still lived in small villages, struggling against nature. Then, in the southern part of Mesopotamia, modern-day Iraq, a transformation began. Here, on the fertile plains between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, the Sumerians created the very first cities in human history. They were not just farmers, they became builders, engineers, priests, and kings. In a matter of centuries, they laid the foundations of what we call civilization. But who were they? Strangely, even after decades of archaeological research, the true origin of the Sumerians remains a mystery. Unlike many ancient peoples, the Sumerians did not claim to come from somewhere else. Their own texts simply present them as if they had always been there. Some theories suggest they may have migrated from the east, perhaps from the Iranian plateau, while others argue they developed locally. What is clear, however, is that they spoke a unique language, Sumerian, that has no known relatives. It is what linguists call a language isolate. That alone sets them apart as a mysterious and singular people in world history. The first thing that made Sumer remarkable was its cities. By 3500 BCE, places like Eridu and Uruk were already thriving centers with tens of thousands of inhabitants. To put that into perspective, at a time when most humans still lived in small farming communities, Uruk may have had over 40,000 people, making it the largest city in the world. Towering temples called ziggurats dominated the skyline, while busy markets connected farmers, craftsmen, and traders. For the first time, humanity began to experience urban life. But cities require organization. The Sumerians solved this through some of history's greatest innovations. They developed the earliest known system of writing, cuneiform, to keep track of trade, taxes, and temple offerings. They organized complex irrigation networks to control the unpredictable rivers. They established laws and government structures, setting the stage for later empires like Babylon and Assyria. Religion was at the very heart of their society. The Sumerians believed that the world was controlled by powerful gods, each linked to natural forces. An, the sky god, Enlil, the lord of the winds, and Inanna, the goddess of love and war. Temples were not just religious centers, they were economic and political hubs. Priests managed resources, workers, and rituals that kept society in balance. To the Sumerians, life itself depended on maintaining harmony with the divine. Even myths we recognize today find their earliest echoes here. The story of the Great Flood, for example, appears in Sumerian texts long before it was written into the Bible. The famous Epic of Gilgamesh, considered the world's oldest epic, was born in these very lands. Through such stories, the Sumerians asked timeless human questions. Why do we die? What is the purpose of life? Can humans ever achieve immortality? Their technological achievements were equally astonishing. They invented the wheel, developed the first plows, and created systems of mathematics based on the number 60, a legacy that still survives in how we measure time, 60 seconds, 60 minutes. They designed architectural innovations, crafting houses, palaces, and temples out of mud brick, a simple material that nonetheless allowed them to shape entire cities. But perhaps what is most striking is how quickly this civilization advanced. In just a few centuries, they went from scattered villages to bustling cities, from oral traditions to written texts, from simple farming to organized states. This Sumerian revolution is why many historians call Mesopotamia the cradle of civilization. And yet, the mystery of the Sumerians lingers. Where did their language come from? Why did such an advanced culture eventually decline and disappear into history, leaving their cities to crumble beneath the sands? These questions remain, waiting to be explored in the chapters ahead. The story of the Sumerians is not just about an ancient people, it is about the birth of everything we take for granted today: writing, cities, law, and organized religion. To understand them is to understand the very beginning of human civilization. Close your eyes and imagine a time more than 5,000 years ago, when the world was still wild, and most people lived in small farming villages scattered across the fertile plains of Mesopotamia. Life was simple: planting crops, herding animals, and surviving the harsh cycles of flood and drought. But in the land of the Sumerians, something remarkable was happening. Humanity was about to take one of the greatest leaps in history: the creation of the very first cities. Among these, one name shines brighter than the rest: Uruk. Often called the world's first true city, Uruk was unlike anything humanity had ever seen. By around 3,200 BCE, it may have housed more than 40,000 people, a population so large that it rivaled many medieval cities thousands of years later. In a world where most humans had never seen a settlement larger than a few hundred people, Uruk was a miracle of organization, architecture, and imagination. At the heart of Uruk rose a massive temple complex dedicated to the goddess Inanna, later known as Ishtar. This was no ordinary shrine. Towering platforms of sun-baked mud brick formed the earliest versions of ziggurats, stepped temple towers that reached toward the heavens. To the Sumerians, these structures were not just buildings, they were the earthly homes of the gods, and the entire city revolved around them. Priests, administrators, and workers all labored under the belief that maintaining harmony with the divine was the key to survival. But cities are more than temples. They are living organisms, filled with markets, workshops, and streets alive with sound. Archaeology shows that Uruk and other early Sumerian cities had specialized districts, areas for pottery, metalwork, textiles, and trade. Farmers brought their grain and livestock to the city, where scribes recorded transactions on clay tablets using the earliest system of writing, cuneiform. Merchants exchanged goods with distant lands, bringing precious stones from Afghanistan, timber from Lebanon, and metals from Anatolia. For the first time in human history, long-distance trade networks were woven together by the pulse of urban life. The rise of cities also transformed society itself. In villages, people were often equal, bound by family ties and local traditions. But in cities, hierarchy emerged. At the top stood kings and priests who claimed authority as chosen by the gods. Beneath them were administrators, scribes, soldiers, craftsmen, and farmers. At the very bottom were slaves, often prisoners of war, who built and maintained the monumental structures that still amaze us today. The city created complexity, but it also created inequality, a pattern that would echo throughout all of human history. Uruk was not alone. Other cities flourished across Sumer, each with its own patron deity and unique character. Ur, located closer to the sea, became a hub of trade and seafaring. Lagash, Eridu, and Kish each rose and fell in importance over the centuries. Together, these cities formed a patchwork of independent city-states, often competing with one another for resources and prestige. Sometimes they formed alliances. Other times, they fought wars that were recorded on tablets and carved into stone. This world of rivalry and cooperation was the training ground for the empires that would later dominate Mesopotamia. Daily life in these cities was both ordinary and extraordinary. Imagine waking at dawn to the sound of animals in the marketplace, the smell of fresh bread baked in clay ovens, and the sight of temple processions filling the streets with music and ritual. Children learned the basics of farming or craft work, while a lucky few were trained in the scribal schools that taught the difficult art of writing. Women played essential roles, managing households, weaving textiles, and even serving as priestesses in temples. Life was not always easy. Disease, famine, and war were constant threats. But the cities offered a richness of experience that village life could never provide. What made these early cities so revolutionary was not just their size, but their permanence. A village could be abandoned. A city like Uruk endured for centuries. Generations lived and died within its walls, contributing to a collective memory that was written in clay and preserved for thousands of years. The very idea of civilization, the notion that people could build lasting institutions, traditions, and identities, was born in these streets. The creation of the first cities also changed humanity's relationship with time itself. With writing, events could be recorded. With temples and laws, traditions could be passed down unchanged. With trade and diplomacy, connections reached far beyond local horizons. For the first time, humans began to think not just of survival, but of legacy. They asked themselves, what will remain after we are gone? And the answer lay in the towering walls, the sacred temples, and the carefully inscribed tablets of the Sumerian cities. When we walk through the ruins of Uruk or Ur today, we see only fragments, crumbled bricks, scattered artifacts, faded inscriptions. But in their time, these were vibrant, bustling centers of life, full of energy, ambition, and faith. They remind us that the first cities were not simply places on a map. They were symbols of human imagination, determination, and the eternal drive to build something greater than ourselves. The rise of Uruk and the other Sumerian city-states marked a turning point in history. Humanity had crossed a threshold it would never return from. The age of villages was over. The age of cities, of civilization, had begun. Yet with this new age came a problem that would reshape the destiny of humankind. Cities meant complexity. Thousands of people trading goods, paying taxes, borrowing grain, and offering sacrifices to the gods. Oral memory alone was no longer enough. A farmer could forget what he owed. A merchant could cheat his partner. A priest could miscount offerings. Civilization required something new, an external memory, a way to capture thought itself. And so the Sumerians invented writing. At first, writing was not about literature or poetry. It was practical, born out of necessity. Around 3200 BCE, Sumerian scribes began pressing marks into soft clay tablets with a reed stylus. These earliest symbols represented commodities: a jar of oil, a bushel of barley, a flock of sheep. A simple drawing of a jar meant oil. A triangle shape stood for grain. These were not yet words, but pictures, pictographs. Over time, however, these pictures evolved. As trade expanded and administration grew more complicated, symbols became increasingly abstract. A stylized wedge pressed into clay could stand for multiple sounds or concepts. This wedge-shaped system became known as cuneiform, from the Latin cunus, meaning wedge. What began as bookkeeping soon transformed into a fully developed writing system, capable of recording speech, stories, and laws. The invention of cuneiform was revolutionary. For the first time in history, human thought could outlive the thinker. Ideas, prayers, contracts, and royal decrees could be preserved across generations. Writing shattered the limitations of memory and gave birth to history itself. In the temples of Uruk, priests used writing to track offerings to the gods. In marketplaces, merchants recorded contracts and trade deals. In palaces, kings inscribed their victories on clay tablets and stone steles, ensuring that their names would echo long after their deaths. And in schools, young scribes spent years mastering the hundreds of signs, memorizing their forms, and practicing on endless tablets until their hands grew calloused. Literacy was not for everyone. It was a skill of the elite, a sacred power that set scribes apart as guardians of knowledge. But writing did more than preserve numbers and names. It opened the door to myth, poetry, and philosophy. From the clay tablets of Sumer emerged the Epic of Gilgamesh, the world's oldest surviving epic, filled with tales of kings, gods, and the search for immortality. Through writing, the Sumerians asked the deepest human questions. What is the meaning of life? Why do we die? Can we ever escape our fate? Without writing, such stories would have vanished with the breath of the storyteller. With writing, they became eternal. Writing also reshaped power. A king could now issue laws not just spoken aloud, but carved in stone, unchangeable and visible to all. Contracts written in cuneiform bound merchants and farmers with undeniable authority. Knowledge was no longer fluid, it became fixed, permanent, enforceable. In this way, writing became a tool of both liberation and control, preserving wisdom but also binding societies in new systems of order. The physical act of writing itself shaped culture. Imagine a scribe sitting in a dimly lit room, clay tablet on his lap, reed stylus in hand. Each stroke had to be precise, each wedge angled correctly. Once the marks were made, the tablet could be baked in the sun or in a kiln, turning soft clay into stone-hard permanence. Thousands of such tablets have survived to this day, carrying with them the voices of people who lived 5,000 years ago. We can still read their concerns, their prayers, even their complaints. One tablet records a student grumbling about schoolwork. Another preserves a hymn to the goddess Inanna. Yet another lists daily beer rations for workers. Through these texts, the Sumerians still speak to us across the ages. Perhaps the greatest gift of writing was its ability to connect generations. Knowledge could now be accumulated rather than forgotten. Each generation of scribes could build on the discoveries of those who came before. Mathematics, astronomy, medicine, all advanced because they could be recorded, studied, and refined. Without writing, progress would have been fragile, constantly lost and rediscovered. With writing, it became continuous. The invention of writing was not an accident. It was the inevitable response to the demands of urban life. And yet, it was also a leap of imagination, a moment when humans realized that sound and meaning could be captured in symbols. The Sumerians, by creating cuneiform, did more than invent a tool. They transformed the human mind itself. From that moment forward, humanity was not only a speaking species, but a writing one. When we think of civilization, we often picture great monuments, armies, and kings, but the true legacy of the Sumerians lies in those small clay tablets covered in tiny wedge-shaped marks. They may not look impressive compared to pyramids or palaces, but they hold something far greater: the birth of memory, the triumph over time, the dawn of history. The Sumerians could not have known it then, but their invention would outlast their cities, their language, even their people. Though Sumer itself eventually faded, writing endured. It spread to Akkadians, Babylonians, Assyrians, Persians, Greeks, and Romans. And today, in every book, every screen, every written word we encounter, we still live in the shadow of that ancient invention. The Sumerians may be gone, but through their cuneiform tablets, they taught us perhaps the most important lesson of all: that words can outlive us, and that through writing, humanity becomes eternal. But if writing gave humanity memory, religion gave them meaning. In the heart of every Sumerian city stood a massive temple, a ziggurat that seemed to touch the heavens. To the people of Sumer, these were not just places of worship, they were the dwelling places of the gods themselves. The Sumerians believed their world was ruled by a vast pantheon of deities, each with power over nature and fate. An, the god of the sky, was the father of the divine order. Enlil, lord of the air and storms, controlled both destruction and blessing. Inanna, goddess of love and war, embodied passion, chaos, and renewal. To them, every aspect of existence, birth, harvest, floods, even death, was tied to the will of these divine forces. Religion structured daily life. Farmers offered sacrifices to ensure good harvests. Kings claimed their authority from the gods, ruling as their earthly representatives. Priests served as intermediaries, performing rituals to maintain cosmic balance. The temple was not only a sacred space, but also an economic and political hub, managing trade, storing surplus grain, and organizing workers. Through their myths, the Sumerians sought to explain life's deepest mysteries. Why must humans suffer? Why do we die? The story of the flood, written centuries before the Bible, told of divine wrath and survival. The epic tales of Gilgamesh explored friendship, loss, and the search for immortality. Even the gods themselves were portrayed as flawed, struggling with jealousy, love, and rage, reflecting the human condition in divine form. What makes Sumerian mythology remarkable is how much of it echoes through later civilizations. The Akkadians, Babylonians, and Assyrians adopted and reshaped these myths. The Greeks and Hebrews inherited fragments of them, embedding Sumerian ideas into their own religious traditions. In this way, the gods of Sumer never truly disappeared. Their stories traveled across millennia, shaping the way countless cultures understood life, death, and the cosmos. The Sumerians may no longer walk the earth, but their gods and myths still whisper through history. From ancient flood legends to tales of heroes seeking eternal life, the voices of their storytellers live on, reminding us that long before philosophy or science, humanity sought answers in the sacred. The Sumerian world was not a single empire ruled by one hand, but a collection of fiercely independent city-states. Each city, Uruk, Ur, Lagash, Eridu, Kish, was a kingdom in itself, surrounded by walls of mud brick and fields of barley. Each had its own patron deity, its own temple, its own ruler. Yet despite their rivalries, together they created one of the most dynamic civilizations in history. At the center of every city stood the king, known as the Lugal, literally big man. He was not merely a political leader, but also a divine representative, chosen by the gods to maintain order. The king was expected to protect his people, expand his city's influence, and ensure that the gods were properly honored. Power in Sumer was never just about soldiers and laws. It was about sacred duty. One of the earliest and most legendary kings was Gilgamesh of Uruk. He may have been a real historical figure who ruled around 2700 BCE, but over time his deeds grew into myth. The Epic of Gilgamesh portrays him as 2/3 divine and 1/3 human, a mighty warrior who built Uruk's great walls. His story is one of ambition, friendship, loss, and the search for immortality. Through Gilgamesh, the Sumerians explored what it meant to be human and how even kings could not escape death. But beyond legend, real kings left their mark in stone and clay. Inscriptions tell us of rulers who fought endless wars with neighboring cities. One year, Ur might conquer Lagash. The next year, Lagash would strike back. Victory meant not only more land, but also control of vital canals and farmland. In a land where water was life, the struggle for irrigation rights could spark generations of conflict. Yet kings were not only warriors, they were also builders. They oversaw the construction of ziggurats, canals, and city walls. They issued laws, standardized weights and measures, and ensured justice, at least in theory. One of the most famous rulers after the Sumerians, Hammurabi of Babylon, would later codify these traditions into his famous law code. But it was in Sumer where the idea of kingship as lawgiver truly began. Religion reinforced royal power. Kings often declared themselves chosen by the gods or even semi-divine. In inscriptions, they boasted not only of military victories, but also of how they cared for the temple of Inanna or Enlil. To rule was to serve the gods, and to serve the gods was to rule. This sacred bond gave their authority both legitimacy and permanence. Still, power in Sumer was fragile. Unlike the unified pharaohs of Egypt, Sumerian kings ruled constantly shifting alliances. Rivalries, rebellions, and invasions were common. Sometimes powerful priests rivaled the authority of kings. Other times ambitious generals seized power by force. Stability was rare, but perhaps this very instability pushed the Sumerians to innovate politically, militarily, and culturally. Through kingship, Sumer developed the idea of centralized leadership, a model that would echo through Mesopotamia for millennia. From the Akkadians to the Babylonians, the Assyrians to the Persians, every great Mesopotamian empire inherited something from the Sumerian concept of the Lugal, the ruler as protector, warrior, builder, and servant of the gods. In the end, the story of Sumerian kings is a story of ambition and mortality. They built walls, temples, and cities. They fought battles and inscribed their victories on clay. Yet, like Gilgamesh himself, none could escape the passage of time. Their cities fell, their empires crumbled, but their legacy endures. In the idea of kingship, in the myths of heroes, and in the eternal question of what it means to rule, the voices of Sumer's kings still speak to us today. When we think of ancient science, we often imagine Greece or Rome. But centuries before those civilizations, the Sumerians were already experimenting, recording, and discovering. Their brilliance was not abstract, it was deeply connected to daily life. In the bustling streets of Uruk, in the temples of Ur, and in the fields outside Lagash, science was born not as theory but as survival. At the heart of Sumerian knowledge was mathematics. The Sumerians created a number system based on 60, a sexagesimal system that still shapes our world today. Why 60? Perhaps because it is easily divisible by many numbers: 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This practical system allowed them to calculate with surprising accuracy. It is thanks to the Sumerians that we measure an hour as 60 minutes, a circle as 360 degrees, and time itself in divisions that trace back 5,000 years. Mathematics served more than abstract puzzles. Farmers used it to measure fields and calculate harvests. Builders used it to design temples and walls. Merchants used it to weigh silver and grain. Astronomers, gazing into the skies, used it to track the cycles of the moon and the stars. From simple accounting grew a mathematical tradition that would inspire the Babylonians and, eventually, the Greeks. Agriculture, the lifeblood of Sumer, was equally advanced. The land of Mesopotamia was fertile but unpredictable. The Tigris and Euphrates could flood suddenly or run dry in summer. To survive, the Sumerians engineered one of the world's first irrigation systems. Canals, dikes, and reservoirs transformed the desert plain into farmland capable of feeding thousands. This was not just farming. It was engineering on a massive scale, requiring coordination, planning, and constant maintenance. Kings often boasted of digging new canals as proof of their service to the gods and their people. Daily life for ordinary Sumerians revolved around these rhythms of farming, trade, and religion. Families lived in simple mud brick houses, gathered around courtyards where food was prepared and stories were told. Markets bustled with activity. Traders sold fish from the rivers, wool from sheep, and beer brewed from barley. Beer, in fact, was a staple of Sumerian diet, consumed by all classes. Tablets record rations of beer given to workers, showing just how central it was to daily life. The Sumerians also practiced early medicine. Illness, they believed, was often caused by displeased gods or evil spirits, but they also observed symptoms and sought natural remedies. Clay tablets describe treatments using plants, oils, and minerals. A healer might prescribe willow bark for pain relief or mix herbs to treat digestive troubles. Though entwined with magic and ritual, these practices reveal a keen eye for cause and effect. In many ways, the Sumerians laid the groundwork for both spiritual and scientific approaches to health. Education played a vital role in sustaining this knowledge. Young boys destined to become scribes attended schools known as adubas, or tablet houses. There they copied texts, learned mathematics, and trained in cuneiform writing. Discipline was strict. Tablets reveal complaints from students about harsh teachers, but the result was a literate elite capable of preserving and advancing Sumerian science. Science, for the Sumerians, was inseparable from religion. Astronomical observations, for example, were not only practical, but also sacred. The movement of stars and planets was seen as the writing of the gods across the sky. Priests used this knowledge to create calendars, predict eclipses, and set dates for festivals. The line between astronomy and astrology, between science and spirituality, was thin. But in their careful records, we can see the first steps toward scientific thought. What is remarkable is how much of this Sumerian knowledge still touches our lives. Every time we glance at a clock, trace the arc of a circle, or read a weather forecast, we are heirs to their inventions. Their canals shaped the land, their numbers shaped our time, their medicine shaped our healing. The Sumerians may have lived 5 millennia ago, but through their science and daily practices, they remind us that civilization is not only built on kings and temples, it is built on the small, patient acts of counting, planting, healing, and recording, the quiet work that sustains human life. In their mathematics, we see order. In their agriculture, we see ingenuity. In their medicine, we see curiosity. And in all of it, we see the enduring drive of humanity to understand the world, to survive, and to build a future. The cities of Sumer eventually fell silent. Their temples crumbled, their canals filled with sand, their people absorbed into new empires. Yet the legacy of the Sumerians did not vanish. Like seeds carried on the wind, their ideas spread far beyond the plains of Mesopotamia, shaping cultures for thousands of years to come. One of their greatest gifts was writing. Though the Sumerian language itself eventually disappeared, replaced by Akkadian, the system of cuneiform endured. For more than 2,000 years, Babylonians, Assyrians, and Persians continued to use it, adapting it to their own languages. Every contract, every royal decree, every scientific calculation written in cuneiform owed its existence to the Sumerians' first bold experiment with symbols pressed into clay. Without them, the very concept of recorded history might never have been born. Their influence also lived on in law and governance. The Sumerians were the first to envision rulers as protectors and lawgivers, chosen by the gods yet responsible to their people. Later kings, from Hammurabi of Babylon to the emperors of Assyria, built upon this model. Even today, the idea that leaders must preserve order and justice echoes a principle first tested in the city-states of Sumer. In mathematics and science, the Sumerians left a mark that still shapes our daily lives. Their sexagesimal system gave us 60 minutes in an hour, 24 hours in a day, and 360 degrees in a circle. Their astronomical observations formed the foundation of Babylonian star charts, which later guided Greek and Roman scholars. Their early medical texts, blending ritual and remedy, paved the way for more systematic approaches to healing. Agriculture, too, carried their imprint. The irrigation canals that fed Sumerian fields became models for future civilizations. The principle of harnessing rivers to support cities would be repeated in Egypt along the Nile, in the Indus Valley, and in China along the Yellow River. In every case, the challenge was the same: to turn the unpredictability of nature into a stable foundation for human life. The Sumerians were among the first to prove it could be done. But perhaps their most enduring legacy was myth and imagination. The stories of Gilgamesh, the flood, and the gods of Sumer did not end with their own people. They traveled through time, retold by Akkadians, reshaped by Babylonians, and echoed in Hebrew, Greek, and even modern traditions. The search for immortality, the struggle between gods and men, the mystery of creation. These themes were carried forward, becoming part of humanity's shared story. Archaeologists who rediscovered Sumer in the 19th century were astonished. Before then, the Sumerians were forgotten, their names erased by time. Yet buried beneath layers of earth lay thousands of tablets, patiently waiting to speak again. Today, in museums around the world, we can read their voices, contracts, hymns, medical texts, astronomical charts. Each tablet is a window into a civilization that died, but also survived in every culture that followed, in every system of law, in every written word. The Sumerians remind us that civilizations may rise and fall, but ideas endure. Their cities no longer stand, yet their inventions still shape our calendars, our governments, our literature, and our dreams. We live, in many ways, in the world they imagined. As the first chapter of human civilization, Sumer is more than just history. It is a reminder of what humanity can achieve, to turn mud into cities, to turn sounds into symbols, to turn fleeting stories into eternal memory. The Sumerians may be gone, but through their legacy, they taught us what it means to be civilized. And that is why, even 5,000 years later, their story is still our story.